The nation of the East, its people chosen by heaven, is a ray of sunlight shining upon the third Israel. There, the bride to represent earth was born. Sought by humankind for the past 6,000 years, the bride of the Lamb finally arrived. She married a man who has revealed the secrets of heaven. And now, all humankind, suffering from fallen history, greets the true parents, opening the path for humanity with her husband, Reverend Moon. Mrs. Moon, true mother, who will accomplish heaven's wish of creating God's homeland. Her life has been one of total sacrifice for God's providence, and now she conveys the message of true peace to the humanity. As the faithful partner of Reverend Moon, and as the one who represents all women, Mrs. Hak Ja-han Moon has been praying and working all her life in order to establish God's heavenly kingdom of Chon Il-guk. Even today, Mrs. Moon walks the path of Queen of Peace and the true parents, centering on God's true love. At the time of Mrs. Moon's birth, the 1940s were a difficult period for the Korean people, suffering under the Japanese occupation. As the Israelites in Jerusalem under Roman rule 2,000 years ago were spiritually active, centering on John the Baptist, in order to receive Messiah, the 1940s were just the same in Korea, when people were intensely searching for God's way. The spiritual activities in Korea were most active in northern part of Korea. In northern Korea's eastern region of Wonsan, these activities happened centering on males, and in the western region of Chulsan, they happened centering on females. At that time, spiritual activities were proliferating in Pyongyang so much that it was called the Jerusalem of the East. Mrs. Soon A-hong, Mrs. Moon's mother, was married to a teacher named Sung Un Hang. Their marriage was officiated by Ho Bin Yi, a spiritual leader who was leading a movement searching for God's way. The two led a very sincere life of faith. After 10 years of waiting, Mrs. Hong finally gave birth to her first child. Reverend Ho Bin Yi told Mrs. Hong about his vision before the baby was born. It was as if a graceful crane was swooping from a pine tree into her embrace. Mr. Sun Un Han also dreamt about a pair of cranes playing with each other in a green pine tree forest. It was a beautiful dream of two cranes, a symbol of peace and good fortune for the suffering Korean people. After having the dream, Mrs. Sun Un Han named her daughter Hak Ja-han. Mrs. Moon was born at Anju in South Pyongan Province on January 6, 1943, by the lunar calendar. When she was about to be born, Mrs. Hong realized her daughter's fate and the works of God at that time. After she gave birth, she had a mysterious dream. Toward the end of Japan's war in the Pacific Ocean, Japanese armies plundered any scrap metals and food they could find in Korea in order to supply their rations and produce weapons. But all of a sudden, everything that was stolen from the Korean people flew across the Hyonhaetan into her house, filling the rooms. Then Mrs. Hong woke up suddenly. Today, Japanese members provide much support for the True Parents' work. Looking back on it now, it seems as if the dream was telling her about the mission of True Mother, who is the representative of all women, and Japan, who is the representative of all Eve nations. On the very day the baby was born, Mrs. Hong dreamt about the hideous Satan. I must get rid of the baby now, for she is danger to me, least I shall perish.
Begone, Satan! Who are you to kill my daughter that I have been longing for so long?
The grandmother comforted Mrs. Hong, who woke up sweating.
It must be because you are weak from the labor. Why does he want her dead, Mother? There is a legend of Johan Jun Mirak, which says the heaven will send its daughter to our family. If Satan tried to harm her in your dream, then the one the legend has foretold must be her. If Satan has his eye on her, we must raise her with great sincerity, Mother. Yes, raise her with great care.
Sometime later, she heard a voice from the heavens saying, "This baby belongs to the Lord, raise her well." She realized that the baby was born with a great mission.
Mrs. Moon received great influence from her mother, Mrs. Hong. Mrs. Hong was born in 1914 at Zhongzhou, which is the same birthplace as Reverend Moon. Mrs. Hong's faith was so strong that she went out and street witnessed in the crossroad between Anju, Huachon, and Gange at a time when the Japanese occupiers were persecuting Christian believers. Mrs. Hong would say, "The Lord does not come upon clouds, but comes wearing physical body." Instead of being shackled by literal interpretation of the Bible, she listened to spiritual revelations and words of truth from heaven. Her mother and the grandmother from the mother's side placed their greatest efforts in preparation in a spiritual church for the coming of the Messiah. August 15th, 1945, Liberation. From then, True Mother's mother told her, "Your father is God." Mrs. Hong continued her life of purity and sincerity, and also raised her daughter in order to meet the Lord, the one to become the heaven's wife. Mrs. Hong's daughter, she received a great blessing from a spiritual group. Following the Songju Church, the mother of Ho Bin Ho, who was the head of Bokjun Church that was making preparations to welcome the coming Lord, personally gave True Mother a benediction. At the time, Ho Bin Ho was incarcerated in the Daedong Security Office in Pyongyang with Reverend Moon. Since this time, their fate with the spiritual group was mysteriously intertwined by a great sense of purpose.
They brought True Mother to the Songju order at Anju in North Korea to let her receive the benediction from Ho Bin Ho of Bokjong Church, and it is believed that served as True Mother's condition to receive the blessing of meeting Reverend Moon after 3 generations. Mrs. Moon inherited the preparations made for the second Advent, who will come in flesh, and became the physical embodiment who received that foundation of sincerity. In 1948, determined to find her son, Sun Jong-hung, grandmother Won-mo Jo, decided to head south with Mrs. Hong and the newborn baby. Instead of returning home, he was working at the Army headquarters in Seoul as a medical officer after he finished Waseda University in Japan. It was because he was disappointed by the corruptions of the North, which were different from what they promoted themselves to be. The way south was not easy. They were even captured by North Korean soldiers near the 38th parallel line. They were captured and imprisoned in the barn of an empty house. The soldiers intimidated them. Everyone was petrified with fear. How will they overcome this obstacle? The key to surviving the moment of life and death was love. She took the liberty to run errands of serving food to the soldiers. After being released, the crowd of people was forced back to the north, but they fled again to south with the help of a guide. As the North and South Korean armies were pointing guns at each other everywhere, their journey could not be delayed even for a moment. In the middle of a frightening night, a child's singing voice echoed as the future Mrs. Moon sang. The soldiers tried to shoot the moving figures, but stopped when they heard someone singing. The group thanked God for protecting them. The Korean War broke out after they went to the south. At 3 o'clock in the morning on June 28th, her uncle, who heard the news of the demolition of Hanggang River, hastened their pace. As soon as they crossed the bridge in his military jeep, the bridge was destroyed. Everyone behind them fell to their death. It seemed that heaven was watching over Grandmother Hong, and her daughter, Mrs. Moon, recalls today that the war made her young life difficult, but she was able to live through its safety because heaven protected her. Daegu, Busan, Jeju. After the war, even as she moved to a different place, her only thought was that she must find the Lord. She opened a small store to provide the means for her family while she was living in Daegu as a refugee, and one day, a sage blessed her daughter's future as he passed by the store. "Is that young child your daughter?"
Yes.
"Raise her well. She is a daughter who will outshine 10 sons. She is a sacred one among heaven and earth."
Yes, I pray that I can offer her to the Lord.
Then looking at the young child, he blessed her with another prophecy. "She will marry at 17. Her husband will be of much older age. Also, they will be people of great wealth, who will guide the land, the ocean, and even the heaven." With such blessings, they moved to Jeju Island and lived there for a brief time. They moved there to meet Pyeonghwa Jung, who was the Songju Church's leader, Songdu Kim's young son. He was a man of great faith, even reenacting Jesus' wearing the thorny crown and being nailed onto the cross in order to feel the painful heart of Jesus. There, Mrs. Hong plowed fields, volunteered to serve others, and ate raw foods, all to cultivate her daughter's faith. After changing schools 3 times, she graduated elementary school and, after many obstacles, entered Songjong Girls' Middle School.
그 당시에 그 어린 그 어머님에 대한
When I first saw her,
첫째로
she was very careful.
남자 이상으로 아주 침착했어요. 어린 나이에 말이죠. 아주 침착.
She spoke very well. And another thing,
두뇌가 말이죠.
was that she was exceptionally smart.
머리가 아주 그
Exceptionally smart.
아주 비상했어요.
Afterward, by the recommendation of her uncle, she entered St. Joseph's Nurses' School. This is the former body of today's Catholic University's Nurses' School. The school operated a dormitory, and the regulation of the dormitory, where a nun who was the head mistress was very strict. Though she was surrounded by the life of poverty and desperation in the South, she was raised as a pure child, untainted by the secular world. It was partly because Mrs. Hung raised her with the standard of a pure life by making her read a religious book such as the Story of Saints. Then in November of 1955, as Mrs. Hong discovered the identity of the Lord, whom she had been seeking for decades, from Sok Chon-jong, who was a member of Songju Church. The Lord was in the headquarters church of Unification Church, which was also called the Seoul Church. The man she sought to see immediately was none other than Reverend Moon. The man she saw twice in the dreams was the Lord she had been waiting for. Next year, in the spring of 1956, when she graduated the Bong-i Elementary School in Chuncheon, the 14-year-old girl met Reverend Moon for the first time. It was a moment when the sincerity of 3 generations finally bloomed as a beautiful flower. The one they have been waiting for. How joyful it was to finally know he was the Lord. After asking her name, Reverend Moon muttered 3 times, Oh Hak-ja-hun was born in Korea. He must have been waiting for the right time. After receiving a revelation saying, The day is close at hand and you must pray, Hak-ja-hun began praying after emptying her mind. She was like a white lily in a peaceful place. Thanks to strict education that separated her from the secular world, and after receiving the standard of absolute faith, she was chosen to be Reverend Moon's wife when she was 17, at 4 o'clock on March 1st, 1960 by lunar calendar. They were engaged in the presence of 3 of Reverend Moon's disciples, Young-fi Kim, Wan-pil Kim, and Hyo-won-yu.
Countless numbers of cranes came from the sky. He waved them away, but they kept coming back, covering True Father.
The Mother of the Universe is the one whose last name is Han, including Mrs. Sun Do-ji and Mr. Do-uk-song, who were spiritually open. Many have had revelations about the marriage of Reverend Moon and Hak-ja-hun. The candidate for his new bride had to be younger than 20 years old. Reverend Moon explained this using the principle, since Eve fell when she was 16, 3 years had to be added as a period of indemnity, making the age 19. People recall that she was physically more mature, which proved further that she was prepared by heaven in every aspect. God's work of sending her to this world with the mission of true mother is apparent when we just look at her family name, Han. Scholars say there had been a great nation even before the time of Go-joseon that was ruled by the Han clan, and that this spirit of the Hans has continued down to the current generation of Korean people, who is reflected in the name of the nation, Daehanminguk. This nation called Han predates Go-joseon by far, and Han is introduced in one of the Chinese history books called Si-kyong. This Han-hu is the oldest ancestor of Korean people to be recorded. This family name of the Hans came into existence long before China. And this name is the first family name of our people, and is the oldest recorded root of our ancestry. The family of Han is also the family to produce the most number of queens, and its position in the history is firm, including Queen Wi-suk, who was the mother of Wan-gon, the first king who founded Koryo. There were 13 queens just in the Chosun dynasty.
한신! 우리 어머니. 여자를 자랑할 수 있는 한신의 문중에 이끌어낸 그 문선생 사모님 한씨 이상 자랑할 여자가 어디 있어?
On April 11, 1960, 16th of March by the lunar calendar at 10 o'clock, in the presence of the selected 700 members from all over the nation, the historical holy marriage took place at the headquarters church in Chonpa-dong. True parents became the true origin of humankind through this holy marriage, and could obtain the starting point where the ideal of creation could be fulfilled, mending the failure of the fall of Adam and Eve. Humankind was blessed through this holy marriage with the grace of being able to be restored as the children of God. The coming of the true husband and wife centering on heaven, this was the beginning of the hope of establishing a peaceful world through the true family. Mrs. Hong expressed her joy for the holy marriage through a poem.
suffering was awaiting the new bride. She had to live outside of the headquarters church for 3 years, indemnifying the course walked by Father, and she had to stand victorious. It was truly a difficult path of restoring the position of the daughter, the position of the wife, and the position of the mother in order to indemnify the fall of Eve. It was a difficult life, but the birth of the first child gave her much joy. It was the formation of the true family which God had wanted for so long. The true parents and true family are not only the ideal of creation, but also the hope of humanity, which was lost in the beginning of history. Finally, on January 1st, 1968, after the completion of the 7-year course, True God's Day was proclaimed through New Year's prayer at 3 o'clock in the morning. The most beautiful name anywhere in the world is Mother. Mrs. Moon had to become a mother from a girl without being able to enjoy her prime years. Having given birth during the winter inside a freezing room, her life was sometimes threatened while recuperating from the labor. However, she endured the sufferings of her providential life, her life as the true mother. Reverend Moon, who had to spread the truth and gospel to the world while leaving his wife alone at home, could only convey his heart of love through letters.
Please know that all this is to prove the value of mother, and let us overcome the final cross of Shimjong. Please become the mother whose life can be revered by all, whose life is the model life for all women, and become the mother whose value is even greater than father.
Though it was a difficult path, Mrs. Hakta Hanmun says that Father's love was what made her able to withstand the pain of erecting the model life of true mother. However, the path of suffering was far from over.
The path of restoration through indemnity is only known by heaven. It was a pain-ridden path which no one had successfully walked before. However, this may have been the reason for the successful marriage. The crane finally flaps its wings and begins soaring through the sky after 1,000 years of waiting. The days spent for the world rather than the family. Mother not only supported her husband by participating in important events and tours abroad, but also had to take care of her 14 children tirelessly.
In January of 1984, Mother was preparing for anti-communism lectures during her short stay in Korea after supporting Father at his world witnessing. Their second son was called by heaven. He died in a car accident trying to save his friends. It was a tragic death. The son who has gone the path of an offering. Father, after winning over the realm of death through love, proclaimed this day as the day of victory of love and transformed their hearts filled with sadness into true love. Her sadness of losing a son could not be compared to that of anyone else. However, faithfully obeying her husband's wish, Mother had to hide her tears inside. 5 children were sacrificed to heaven. Though it was the will of heaven, these times to Mother were the times of great suffering, having to endure unbearable pains. Father's heart was full of pain, just as much as Mother's. However, he overcame it with the power of his will, saying, "Even while being swayed by a storm, the root must keep growing in order to secure its position." During Father's relentless march forward, Mother had to endure great pains of the heart, worse than any physical pain. Even though she had to bury her dead children in her heart, she had to appear as an unshaken leader toward the members of the Unification Church. There was not a day of comfort. She had to endure the pains of her children being persecuted at their schools and in the society in general. Though she endured with her love of God and the absolute faith toward Father, the path of providence came with much pain.
한번 제왕절개 수술을 하게 되면은 자연분만은 어려워요. 제왕절개 수술을 해서 영진이가 태어났어요. 지금 낳은 아이들을 위해서 엄마가 건강해야 될 텐데 왜 이렇게 자기 생각은 안 하느냐고 이런 말을 했어요. 그런데 내 입장에서는 그만둔다고 말할 수가 없어. 하늘이 나에게 바라는 것이 몇입니까 하고 기도했어요.
Together with Father, using every second and minute for the will of heaven, leaving the model life to save the world. True mother. True mother. A woman is weak, but a mother is strong. The path that must be trodden as the mother of humanity. Mrs. Moon walks the path to save the world with Reverend Moon, accepting the will of God to use her for great purposes. She endured with nothing but prayer. Reverend Moon expresses sincere gratitude to the woman who has walked the path of suffering as the female leader of the humanity. Reverend Moon explains that Mrs. Moon, who is his wife and his eternal partner,
우리 어머니가 못났어, 잘났어. 아니 저 서양 어디 독일 가도 미인이라고 하고 말이야, 프랑스 가도 미인이라고 하고 말이지, 영국 가도 미인이라고 하고 말이야, 아프리카는 더더욱이나 뭐 미국 가도 전부다 미인이라고 가지고 나보고 언제나 해피에스트 맨이라고 해피에스트 허스밴드라고 그러더라고. 그 어머니 잘났어, 못났어? 얼굴이 잘났나? 얼굴도 잘났지만 마음씨도 잘났어.
In mid-1960s, Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon visited Japan, America, and European nations to create an international foundation, and at the same time strengthen the foundation of the rural enlightenment movement. Then they went to America in 1972. It was to transcend national barriers and advance the will of God into the international level. Young intellectuals of the nation who were thirsting for truth came to Reverend Moon. America's ember of faith was rekindled through this one religious leader from Korea, and the unification movement spread like a wildfire. As the Unification Church from Korea gained an unprecedented momentum, opposition started to persecute. The ones who had to suffer racial and religious discrimination were not only the church members, but the children of true parents as well. As threats of assassination always gloomed over her husband, Mrs. Moon had to live in fear. America was joining its forces together to stop the spread of the Unification Church. Even for some important figures, persecution continued as well. Then, on July 20th, 1984, True Father was imprisoned in Danbury Prison.
좀 이르지 않아요?
저리인가?
Father's absence seemed to have left a big hole in the movement. Mrs. Moon's grief and agony was greater than anyone's.
내가 여러분들에게 부탁하고 싶은 것이 있다면 참부모와 동시대에 같이 호흡하면서 같이 일한 여러분들의 깊이 반성하고 회개하는 자리에서 순수한 마음으로 부모님 앞에 보여드려야 할 실적을 가져야 된다고 생각합니다.
Mrs. Moon rolled up her own sleeves in the face of danger. Unshaken, she visited her husband every day and led the campaign to take father out of the prison. She took up this task of the spiritual anchor of the unification movement with a solemn heart. The children helped her as well.
I cried and I cried. But my father told me not to weep for him and not to be angry at the government that jailed him. He told me, as he has told his millions of followers throughout the world, to turn our anger and grief into powerful action to make this country truly free again.
This is understood to have made on the internal level the tradition of cooperation between mother and children as the 40-year wilderness course was reaching its end. People of conscience in America rose up, and new supporters of the movement soon could also be found in Korea and Japan. The alliance between America and us is made by blood. I think that going against their own constitution to incarcerate Reverend Moon, who has come from such an ally nation, for 1.5 years is an insult to Korean people as a whole. During the time of imprisonment, Mrs. Moon received honorary doctoral degrees from 4 universities. It was proof to the fact that in heaven's providence, you receive blessings after you get hit. On August 20th, 1985, Reverend Moon was released after 13 months of incarceration. He was released 5 months early due to the movement to free him waged by America's leaders from fields of religion, politics, and the media. The victory of complete freedom, Reverend Moon was moved by the willpower of his wife more than anything. It was a great work of heaven's where God's providential usage of her as the true mother of humanity has taken one more step forward. Tribulation hardens the power of will. The church became stronger, and its steps towards the world became more determined than ever. Communism backed by the Soviet Union accelerated its expansion in the 1980s, and so Reverend Moon stood on the front line risking his life to stop this. Mrs. Hong's close support was crucial to Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon's march forward. Mrs. Hong went to America in 1974 when she was 60 and lived there for 5 years. At the time, the threat of terrorism from the extreme left was everywhere. As Reverend Moon's mass rally to awaken America increased in number, Mrs. Hong prayed and prayed again to heaven for the safety of Reverend and Mrs. Moon.
저도 이스트가든에 부모님 가정을 모시고 있지만 저도 놀지 않습니다. 저도 주야버시 기도하고 내가 힘자라는 대로 무엇이든지 하고 여러분은 끝까지 생명을 다해서 이 나라를 위해서 이 조국을 위해서 이 국가를 위해서 생명을 다 바칠 것을 여러분은 다짐해야 합니다.
Mrs. Hong was a great shining star who served the true children after following the mission headquarters to America. On November 3rd, 1989, Mrs. Moon stood by Mrs. Hong as she passed on to the next life. The sorrow from parting with her mother, who had lived her life like a shadow, could not be described with words. The sky seemed clearer that day. 76 years old, 34 years after she joined the church, she ascended to the eternal nation of God after achieving the victory on her course for God and true parents by sacrificing her mind and body with loyalty.
이렇게 마지막 순간을 아름답게 장식시키고 돌아가신 데 대해서 육신에 따라서 또 참부모의 입장에 정말 감사합니다. 부디 여러분들이 홍순의 할머니를 생각하신다면 그가 지금까지 뜻대에 걸어나온 길을 표대로 삼으셔서 부디 아름다운 뜻길의 유종의 묘를 거두어 주었으면 하는
하나님 또한 감사합니다.
Chongpyeong Heaven and Earth Training Center, located by the Bukhan River. Here, from January of 1995, 6 years since Mrs. Hong's death, a new work of heaven is unfolding. This place has now become the place where the members from all over the world can receive the grace of resurrection. If she was the model of faith to the members, she is now in death the member of spiritual resurrection for the entire Unification Church.
자기 책임을 다 하고 갔기 때문에 우리 설교는 기념해서 모셔야 할 대모님의 자격이기 때문에 대모님을 아시겠어요? 여기 그 자리에 충심 뭐라고 했습니다? 충심, 충성스러운 일편단심 마음 가지고 생축의 재물을 되는 그런 길을 다 간 할머니와 같이 살게 될 때는 하나님으로부터 핍박이 없이 복받을 수 있는 시작이 이제부터 될 것이다.
Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon, who were at the forefront of the fight against communism, met Gorbachev in 1990 to press him for reformation, then visited North Korea's Pyongyang the next year. Lenin's status was brought down and Reverend Moon came face to face with Kim Il-sung. Reverend Moon put his life on the line with his speech of criticism towards the Juche ideology by emphasizing the will of God in North Korea's Congress building. Bodyguards ready to draw their guns stood there watching Reverend Moon. Something could go very wrong. Mrs. Moon, who was together with her husband, began to sweat in fear. The path of Sugong movement was a dangerous course filled with deadly threats, but it was only faith that could help them. However, Il-sung Kim, moved by Reverend Moon's audacious speech, said that a real reverend has come, and he threw a big feast for them. Everyone was surprised at the turn of events. This meeting, where the head of Sungong movement and the last head of communism hugged and swore to be brothers, opened the gate of peaceful unification for Korea.
The Age of Women dawned, April 10th, 1992. Reverend and Mrs. Moon founded the Women's Federation for World Peace under the banner of "Let us establish the world of peace with the power of women, the power of mother."
이제 세계사적 승리의 전통을 세운 참아버지와 역사적인 여성 대표로서 승리한 세계적 여성 대표 참어머니를 모시고 참된 남자상은 물론이요, 참된 어머니의 상, 참된 아내의 상, 참된 딸의 상을 정립해야 됩니다. 이렇게 이루어진 이상적 가정들이 모여서 이상적인 국가, 이상적인 세계를 이루게 되는 것입니다.
Mrs. Moon's voice, echoing through the spring rain, united with the will of 100,000 people who came, and this new flame of a woman's movement spread to the whole world like wildfire. Starting from the founding of Women's Federation, this stands on the forefront of realizing world peace through the true family. In order to do this, Mrs. Moon spread the word, traveling thousands of miles, one nation per day. She went to Korea, Taiwan, Japan, America's capital Hill, UN headquarters, the Kremlin Palace in Russia, the Great Hall of the People in China, the Middle East area, that is the origin of Christianity and Islam, many nations in Europe, and even the high mountains of South America and the jungles of Africa. Even the malaria in Africa and the communist world that denies God could not stop her march. Visiting all corners of the earth in 3 short months, and the fact that she was successful in leading rallies in 113 cities all over the world was nothing short of a miracle. Women's Federation was able to create both domestic and international organizational foundations from its starting year, thanks to the sincere efforts of Mrs. Moon. Mrs. Moon is actively seeking to substantially realize the founding spirit of the Women's Federation which is establishing the peaceful world and sound society through creating the families of true love upon the foundation of maternal love. Centering on the Women's Federation, Mrs. Moon from 1992 to 1995 declared to the world that the coming Messiah who will save the world is Reverend Moon.
皆様、メシアとは何かご存知ですか？メシアは誠の父母として来られ、偽りの父母から生まれ、植えられた偽りの根を取り除き、天国世界を創建しなければならない重大なる責任を持って来られるお方です。
Women's Federation for World Peace, centering on Mrs. Moon, began the waves of challenge all over the world by trying to realize the world of peace upon the foundation of true family and heightened human rights for women. The activities and the words infused with the love for humanity was enough to move the hearts of the world. Especially as the gate to unification in the Korean Peninsula was opened after Reverend Moon's meeting with Il-sung Kim of North Korea in the December of 1991, Women's Federation is giving substantial help to the children and women of North Korea. Along with these activities, the Federation is also actively engaging in the education that will lead to the historical reunification of Korean people through providing the Tong-il camp to the children and mothers who will be the force of the future that will realize the unification. Mrs. Moon is especially interested in the Middle East area where the human rights of women are ignored. Women's Conference for Peace in the Middle East, which started to shed the light of peace and reconciliation on Middle East in May 1997, when the air of war was still in the atmosphere, is annually participated by women leaders from over 20 nations in the Middle East, and it is working diligently to realize world peace and the human rights for women.
Mrs. Moon, who is also a member of the board of directors of the World Alliance for Relief, sent helping hands wherever she went while spreading the word with Reverend Moon. That is the heart of Mother. Nursing the children moaning from undeserved sufferings, she healed the world's scars and bruises. She sent relief funds to regions devastated by storms, provided infrastructures such as education and medical facilities to underdeveloped nations, and supported multicultural families, kindling the fire of true love. Mrs. Moon's activities that reflected her love for humanity brought the obvious result of her being invited to the UN, the focal point of the world of diplomats. At the UN, she spoke about women and the true family. She was the first Asian woman to do this. Due to her speech that moved the hearts of the people from around the world, the Women's Federation for World Peace finally became a UN-recognized NGO and still maintains its close relationships with the UN.
After 1992, she toured various places in the world more than 1,000 times. Mrs. Moon's lectures were the providence of God and the miracle of heaven. Mrs. Moon's lecture at the Capitol Hill in America was special. The American government was so moved by Mrs. Moon's lecture that they declared July 8th as Parents' Day, and it is commemorated each year. Moreover, she gave hundreds of lectures in order to wake up the university students who were to become the leaders of the future. The title of her lecture, given in 40 universities in Korea and 100 universities in America, was The True Parents and the Age of Holy Testimony. The Korean lectures were difficult, especially because of a few leftist students who physically blocked her entrance and threatened to harm her. Later, she proclaimed the words of the Holy Testimony with Reverend Moon.
I ask you to devote your best efforts as true parents have toward creating God's ideal family, ideal nation, and the peace kingdom. Please become true princes and princesses who can attend and live together with God, the eternal peace king, as the true parents of humanity.
What kind of God's purpose of creation, the providence of salvation, and the secrets behind the human fall, which was the start of the sinful world? What kind of being is God, and where does the history lead? The words of the Holy Testimony reveal the secrets hidden in the Old and New Testament. Their powerful words created a great ripple of reaction. Their words contain the path, the truth, and the true life and the love of God. Mrs. Moon still travels the world with her burning desire to continue saving people until every last suffering person on the earth is saved. Lectures that started with her soft smile were sodden with tears as she conveyed the heart of God. The heartbreaking pains of the providence are infused in every single word and pause. The truth that the true peace begins from family, that the family overflowing with absolute faith and love is the origin of peace and happiness. Those words give hope and inspiration that resonates within the soul, changes societies, and renews the world. When she was at a place where she could not be with her husband, they gave energy to each other over video telephones or over the internet, and the whole family united and cheered in joy after the rallies. They show us an example of being true parents of the original ideal path of harmony for humanity by giving support to each other in their arduous course toward the creation of a peaceful world. They also sing often. Music transcends national boundaries, and its melodies move and touch people's hearts.
밝아오는 아침 해를 바라보면서 저 희망의 찬새나라로 전진합시다. 한 핏줄을 이어받은 배달의 민족 영원히 빛나리. 너를 위해 노래 부른다. 정나온 덕과 같은 내 맘에 백화 같은 내 동무야. 내가 내게서 피어날 적에 모든 슬픔이 사라진다.
Mrs. Moon's lectures led to a civilian summit conference. The former President George H.W. Bush and his wife, the President of Dominica, the President of Uruguay, the Vice President of Uganda, the Nicaraguan Minister of Defense, and the Mongolian head of the Congress. Mrs. Moon is now treated as a special guest wherever she goes. She spreads the message of a peaceful world through the true family as she has close conversations with current and former national leaders of our society. Everyone who meets Mrs. Moon is moved by her love and truthfulness. Many universities in the world have given honorary doctorates to Mrs. Moon. They recognize Mrs. Moon's selfless acts which have contributed to the peace of the world and the humanity. The turning of the millennium, 1999, In this year alone, Mrs. Moon spread the word for the realization of a peaceful world through the model of the true family in 80 cities of 35 nations. Then she erected the new order by resolving the complicated history of the past with a principle and love. She made the rebirth possible for all people, from the beginning of time to the eternity, from individuals to the cosmos. On June 14, 1999, Reverend Moon gave his wife a citation that said, "You have completed the mission of a true child for the heaven, the mission of true wife for your husband, and the mission of a true parent for your children." Mrs. Moon was showered with the grace of heaven and earth. After the year 2000, Reverend and Mrs. Moon accelerated their march on the course to substantiate the establishment of Cheonil-guk, God's heavenly kingdom on earth. For this, they toured 120 nations in 2005 after founding the Universal Peace Federation. Then in next year toured 180 nations for the World Tour for the restoration of the homeland with their children and grandchildren. Every day after the events, there was a Hunduk Fue in the morning.
우리는 행복한 시대에 살고 있는 행복한 사람이라 하는 것을 매일매일 이 말씀을 훈독하면서 생활해야 되는 거예요. 그리고 이 말씀은 여러분들이 생활하는 데 있어서 지침서예요. 교과서예요.
She gave encouragement to the leaders and members of the Unification Church.
이 말씀의 본체신 아버님이 왜 매일 이걸 읽겠어요? 이게 꿈이 아니에요. 꿈이 아니야. 우리 현실로 이루어야 할 우리의 책임이 있는 거예요. 몰라서 못했다는 말은 입에 담을 수도 없어. 후에 여러분 후손에게 참 우리 조상은 훌륭했다, 책임을 다했다 하는 그런 입장에 서주기를 바라요.
Words that carry the utmost sincerity. The sincerity for the world of peace and the salvation of humanity. The path of will, which she endured with iron will in order to liberate God, who is shackled by the chains of pain and sorrow. The heart of anyone who is touched by her endless love that continues to flow is filled with hope. The new age has dawned. Reverend Moon has worked tirelessly to resolve the sorrowful heart of God, to realize the world of peace and to save humanity, and the painful path of helping beyond him and sometimes beside him. Their life of overcoming arduous obstacles, keeping the sorrow inside of their heart, was the path of the true parents, as true teachers, and as the kings of peace. True mother and true father became one in body. Therefore, true mother who has gained her victory through true love now has the right of an equal position, the right of equal participation, and the right of inheritance with true father. Reverend and Mrs. Moon became one in mind, one in thought, and one in body, centering on God's true love.
본인과 본인의 내자 한합자 총재는 인류의 참부모요, 구세주요, 재림주요, 메시아라고 선포했습니다.
True mother who has walked on the same path of heaven's will for a long time, the universe was mesmerized by the sound of a drop of the words falling onto the taro's leaf. And the heart that encompasses the blue sky embraced the cosmos. If Reverend Moon was the sun that nourishes new life, Mrs. Moon was the moon that receives the sun's light and passes it on to the world. True mother has been shedding the moonlight in the darkness, and now her love is the hope of Cheonil-guk, to the entire humanity. Reverend and Mrs. Moon are marching forward to complete and perfect the strong nation of God and the world of peace, which is the ideal of creation. The rally, which started from Korea, which was proclaimed as God's fatherland in 2011, received a great deal of attention from America, 8 nations in Europe, and in Africa. Even though his age is now over 90, true parents are risking their lives to empower the nations that are facing difficulty with their words.
여러분, 우리가 살고 있는 이 시대는 역사적인 대천주적 혁명기입니다. 하늘 땅의 지배의 날이야. 혁명기입니다. 역사를 바꾸고 영계와 지상계를 하나로 만들어 하나님께서 태초부터 소문하셨던 이상축을 이 세계에 창건하여야 하는 대천주적 혁명기입니다.
Their words were spread in British Parliament, and their message of peace was proclaimed at the UN Europe headquarters at Swiss Geneva. In Africa, the rally was held with the special support of the current president of Nigeria. Now the world is revolving around true parents. The foundation of peace between 194 nations is realizing the ideal of one family under God by becoming brother nations where everyone is equal. Reverend and Mrs. Moon blood, sweat, and tears are now blooming as the flower of life, love, and peace. The path of suffering dotted with pain, walked beside Reverend Moon, braving death all their lives for heaven. The one person he could trust and lean on, while he walked the path for the heaven. As the green barley leaves cover the field, even when the freezing wind blows, she is the flower that bloomed after much pain and suffering. The seed of the Word has spread its root, and the responsibility is now completely fulfilled. Flapping her wings of 1,000-year-old crane, scattering the scene of true love, you are the one who completes perfection. You are our true mother, who is with us always. Spread the dream of peace beyond the horizon full of sorrow. Bloom the flower of peace and love on that plain of eternal happiness.